In the summer of 1859, two of the most powerful empires on Earth aimed dozens of cannons at each other across a narrow channel. 5 warships, thousands of soldiers. And the thing that set it all off was a single pig, eating potatoes in a garden. Yes, a pig. Not a metaphorical pig. Not a code name for some secret weapon. An actual pig, with a real appetite for someone else's vegetables. On one side of the water, 461 American soldiers and 14 cannons. On the other, 5 British warships, 70 guns, and more than 2,000 men. For weeks they stared each other down, fingers near triggers, waiting for someone to give the order. The name history gave this standoff is almost too perfect. They call it the Pig War. And the strangest part isn't that it happened. It's how close it actually came to becoming a real war between two countries that technically were at peace the entire time. To understand how a farm animal nearly dragged the United States and the British Empire into battle, we have to back up 13 years to a treaty that was supposed to prevent exactly this. But before we get into it, if you like history that sounds made up but absolutely isn't, subscribe. This channel runs on exactly these stories. And a question to sit with as we go, what's the dumbest reason you've ever seen two people almost come to blows? Because a government is about to beat it. In 1846, the United States and Britain signed the Oregon Treaty. The goal was simple: draw a clean line and stop arguing about who owned the Pacific Northwest. The line they chose was the 49th parallel, that flat, straight border you can still see today between the western US and Canada. On land, it worked. The trouble started when the border reached the water. The treaty said the boundary should run along the 49th parallel to the middle of the channel, separating the mainland from Vancouver Island, then south out to the ocean. One channel. Sounds precise. Except there wasn't one channel, there were two. To the west ran Haro Strait, to the east ran Rosario Strait. And sitting right between them was a cluster of land called the San Juan Islands. Draw the border down Haro Strait and the islands were American. Draw it down Rosario Strait and they were British. The treaty never said which, so both countries did the natural thing. Both claimed the islands. And both sent settlers to live there as if occupying the place might win the argument. By the late 1850s, the biggest of these islands, San Juan, had two very different populations sharing the same ground. The British side was the Hudson's Bay Company, which ran a large sheep operation called the Bellevue Farm, thousands of animals grazing across the island. The Americans were mostly recent arrivals, settlers and former gold prospectors who'd come up empty in the Canadian gold fields and decided this island looked like a fine place to start over. Two nationalities, one island, no agreed border. Each side convinced the land was legally theirs. For a while, remarkably, everyone got along. Neighbors traded, talked, tolerated each other. But a situation like that is a pile of dry wood. It doesn't need much to catch fire, it just needed a spark. Or, as it turned out, a pig. On the morning of June 15, 1859, an American farmer named Lyman Cutler walked outside and found a large black pig in his garden, eating his potatoes. This was not a surprise attack. The pig had done it before, more than once. It belonged to Charles Griffin, an Irish-born employee of the Hudson's Bay Company who let his animals roam freely across the island. To Griffin, that was normal. To Cutler, whose potato patch kept disappearing into a pig, it was the last straw. So Cutler did something permanent. He grabbed his rifle and shot the pig. To his credit, he knew he'd overreacted. He went to Griffin, admitted what he'd done, and offered to pay for the animal. He suggested $10. Griffin was not interested in $10. He demanded $100. On paper, this is a disagreement about the price of a pig. In practice, it was about to become an international incident, because neither man was really arguing about the pig anymore. As the story goes, the two traded lines that have followed the tale ever since, Cutler insisting the pig was eating his potatoes, Griffin snapping back that it was Cutler's job to keep his potatoes out of the pig. Whether they said it exactly like that, no one can be sure. What we do know is that the conversation went nowhere. Insulted, Cutler pulled his offer entirely, and Griffin escalated. He reported Cutler to the British authorities, who threatened to arrest the American and haul him to Victoria for trial. That was the wrong move. Because to the American settlers, this wasn't about one man and one pig. This was a foreign government threatening to arrest an American on land they believed was American. They panicked and did what nervous settlers do. They signed a petition and begged the U.S. Army for protection. The petition landed on the desk of Brigadier General William S. Harney, commander of the Department of Oregon. And here's where the story gets its accelerant. Harney was famously, enthusiastically anti-British. Handed an excuse to poke the British Empire, he did not hesitate. he sent troops, specifically about 66 soldiers of the 9th Infantry under a young captain named George Pickett, a name some of you will recognize because a few years later he'd lead a doomed charge at Gettysburg. On July 27, 1859, Pickett and his men landed on San Juan Island, with orders to keep the British from landing at all. Pickett was outnumbered, outgunned, and completely unbothered. He reportedly declared he'd make a Bunker Hill of it, promising a heroic last stand over, again, a dead pig. The British were not amused. Governor James Douglas responded by sending warships under Captain Geoffrey Hornby to remove the Americans. The Americans answered by sending more men. The British answered by sending more ships. And so a squabble between two farmers turned into a military buildup. By August 10th, the Americans had 461 soldiers and 14 cannons dug in on the island. Facing them, 5 British warships, 70 guns, and 2,140 men. Two of the most powerful nations on Earth, fully armed, staring across the water. All because a pig ate the wrong potatoes. And somehow, this still wasn't the most absurd part. If you're enjoying watching this spiral, hit like. It genuinely helps more people find these forgotten disasters. And tell me, right now, who do you think should have just walked away? Hold that thought, because someone finally does. Here's the setup on August 10th, 1859. Hundreds of armed men, dozens of cannons, thousands more sailors offshore. Every ingredient for a battle is present, except one. Nobody was allowed to start it. The commanders on both sides had received nearly identical orders from above. Defend yourselves if attacked, but under no circumstances fire the first shot. Neither government wanted to be the country that opened fire and turned a pig into a war, which created one of the strangest standoffs in military history. The soldiers, packed onto a small island within sight of each other, spent their days trying to provoke the enemy into shooting first. They shouted insults across the lines. They taunted. They dared. Anything to get the other side to pull a trigger, so it wouldn't be their fault. And the other side, under the exact same orders, just took it and insulted them right back. An entire international crisis reduced to two armies yelling at each other, both desperately trying not to win. Then Governor Douglas lost patience. He gave a direct order to the top British commander in the Pacific, Rear Admiral Robert Baines. Land the Marines, engage the Americans, take the island by force. Baines had just arrived. He looked at the situation. The warships, the cannons, the thousands of men, the potato dispute sitting at the center of all of it. And he refused. Not, let me think about it. He flatly declined a direct order from the governor. His reasoning became the most famous line of the whole affair. He would not, he said, involve two great nations in a war over a squabble about a pig. Sit with that for a second. The commander of the most powerful navy on the planet was ordered to attack, and decided the whole thing was too stupid to obey. He judged that the dignity of the British Empire was better served by not fighting over a farm animal than by winning. And he was right. That single decision is why this is called the Pig War, and not something far bloodier. One admiral, looking past his orders and his pride, saw the absurdity clearly enough to stop it. The cannons stayed silent, the Marines stayed on their ships, and the two empires kept glaring across the water, furious, armed, and completely stuck, because refusing to fight didn't solve anything. The island was still disputed, the soldiers were still there, both governments still thought they were right. Someone with real authority was going to have to fix this. And when word of the crisis finally crossed the continent to Washington, the reaction was not calm. Remember how slowly news traveled in 1859? All of this, the pig, the troops, the warships, the standoff, had unfolded before the leaders in Washington and London even knew it was happening. When the reports finally arrived, officials on both sides were stunned. Two governments discovered, more or less by mail, that their nations had nearly gone to war over a pig while they weren't looking. The reaction was immediate. Everyone, calm down. U.S. President James Buchanan sent the most senior soldier in the country, General Winfield Scott, all the way across the continent to defuse it. Scott was a veteran negotiator, and he did the obvious thing nobody on the island had the authority to do. He dealt with the British directly and proposed a compromise. The deal was simple. Instead of fighting over the island, both countries would occupy it together. Each side could keep a small garrison of no more than 100 men. The Americans would camp at the south end, the British would camp at the north. And with that, the crisis deflated as fast as it had blown up. The armies shrank, the warships left. The insults stopped. What replaced them was one of the more surreal arrangements of the 19th century, a joint military occupation of a tiny island by two empires that had almost fought over a pig, now sharing the place peacefully. American camp in the south, English camp in the north. And here's the twist. The two garrisons got along. They visited each other. They held joint celebrations. The soldiers sent to potentially kill each other became, essentially, neighbors with a pleasant commute between camps. This went on for years. Then the American Civil War erupted, Pickett left to fight for the Confederacy, and the San Juan question got shelved while much bigger events took over. It wasn't truly settled until 1871, when Britain and the United States signed the Treaty of Washington and agreed to do the sensible thing they could have done at the start: let a neutral party decide. And the neutral party they chose was, of all people, Kaiser Wilhelm III of Germany. The German emperor handed the question to a commission which studied the old treaty, looked at those two channels, and in 1872 ruled that the border ran through Harrow Strait, the Western Channel, which meant the San Juan Islands were American. The British accepted the ruling. Late in 1872, their soldiers packed up English camp and sailed away. The joint occupation was over. The islands were, at last, undisputed. 13 years of standoff, 2 empires, 1 German emperor, and a small mountain of cannons, all finally resolved. And the total body count for the entire pig war stayed exactly what it had been on day 1. 1 pig. So let's clear up what the name gets wrong. The Pig War was never actually a war. Not a single shot was fired between the two sides. No soldier died. No battle was ever fought. The only casualty from the first day to the last was the pig Lyman Cutler shot in his garden. And it wasn't some brief flare-up either. People hear war over a pig and picture an afternoon of shouting. In reality, the standoff and joint occupation stretched across 13 years, from that gunshot in 1859 to the British departure in 1872. But here's what makes it more than a funny footnote. That ridiculous dispute drew a real line. The border running through Harrow Strait today, the one separating the San Juan Islands of Washington State from Canada, is the exact line that argument produced. Every time a ferry crosses that water, it's following a boundary that exists because a pig ate the wrong potatoes. There's even a small monument to the absurdity still standing. At the Old English camp, the British flag is raised and lowered every day by American park rangers. It's one of the only places on Earth where US government employees maintain the flag of another country, out of respect for a war that never actually happened, which leaves the real lesson of the Pig War. 2 empires, thousands of soldiers, and dozens of cannons were brought to the edge of battle by a pig, and pulled back from it by a single officer willing to look ridiculous rather than start something stupid. Sometimes the bravest thing in history is refusing to fire. If the war that wasn't a war was new to you, subscribe and hit like. The next forgotten conflict is even stranger than this one. And drop a comment. Should the pig get a monument too?